Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast for film fans by film fans. Every episode we look at films old and new to choose what should be preserved for all time in our movie vault. With lively topics, big questions and crazy challenges to entertain us and our guests, we always look to have fun by giving you the topics worth discussing and the movies worth watching, even if there are some duds along the way. But don't just take my word for it, here's a preview of what to expect in today's episode.
Because if you look at it in like the order of like the actual trilogy, well, for a while trilogy that we get, it's surprising that this wasn't like the culmination. Like the fact that this is the second film in the trilogy just seems a bit bizarre. Because obviously if they just go, okay, so the first film is setting things up, the second film is completely changing every way that we view an entire series of films. The third one's a sequel.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? I am your father. Wait! Here's Johnny. I'll be back.
It's not the car, it's a very naughty boy.
Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that gives you the topics worth discussing and the movies worth watching. I'm your host, David Osger, and once again I'm joined by my co-host. He's the juggernaut, bitch. It is Craig McDonald. Hello, Craig.
I think that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Comparing me to Vinnie Jones.
Exactly, just Vinnie Jones is the way to your heart.
I mean, obviously, like, I'd like that last comment censored ever so slightly. But yeah, no, fine. I'm more than happy to be a guy who plays like a football hooligan in Euro Trip. Sounds great.
I was also just thinking of the meme that spawned from the films we've been talking about today, in which it would just be me as Magneto, like, show me the real Craig McDonald, and then just you turning into one of the many personas that we compare you to on this podcast.
So eventually we just get to this, and it's just perfection.
Yeah, you just turn into the dinosaur from the Playmobil movie. Perfection.
Yep. Oh, God.
Before we start today, Craig, I have to mention this film as we dedicated an episode to it, its previous installments, and we have now seen the newer version. So for the people at home, what did you think of the new Mortal Kombat, considering you hated the other ones so much?
It had a single promise to obtain, which is to uphold even, which is are they better than the 90s films? Yes, it is better than the 90s films. Is it a like perfect great film? No, there's definitely a lot of how I have issue with. There was a lot that basically just parrots from the 90s versions, including the very, hey, this is an entire film about a tournament. Let's make the entire plot trying to avoid the tournament. Stop doing that! Just play the damn thing out!
Very true. It just continues to astound me how they just cannot adapt these franchises. But today we are talking about mutants within the X-Men movies. We're going to be talking about the X-Men Beginnings Trilogy, as it's often referred to, as we previously talked about the initial trilogy of films that came out back in like the early 2000s. And when we discussed those films, we discussed it with our good friend and comic book expert, Jake Hart. So he's once again here joining us. Hello, Jake. How are you today?
Elohim, Shen, Ra. I've been called many names over many lifetimes, but now I just go by Jake. And I am very excited to be back here to talk about my favorite Marvel heroes, the X-Men, and back with you guys. 1 year on from when I was last on, minus Craig's birthday, of course, from when we did the original trilogy.
Yeah, it was... and interestingly, that's why I wanted to sort of talk about here, sort of bring you into this episode, is how much has changed in terms of superhero films and media, because last year while we spoke to you, obviously that was in the midst of the pandemic and we were suffering a lot of withdrawals from superhero content. But since we've had so many weird and projects that we didn't think we would get. You know, we've had the likes of New Mutants has finally come out. You know, we've had Zack Snyder's Justice League, which we talked about previously when you were on our DC episode. We've had all these Disney Plus shows. So it's kind of changing a lot. And you cover this a lot on Capes, Cowls and Masks. You know, I'm often there with you covering this kind of stuff. But for the people at home, what do you think about this last year of comic book media and how it's going to go forward now that we've had all of these long lost projects come to the surface and different takes, different universes, all that kind of stuff?
I think this is a gift to humanity because we've just spent the last 14 months deprived of socializing and being outside and going to the movies and just being with our friends and geeking over new content that comes out. Sorry, Martin Scorsese. But now it's like after this long wait, it's just like, here you go. The floodgates have opened and it's just non-stop now. Like I was thinking, like, we have 4 MCU films coming out this year alone, and we're already halfway, like half of the year's already gone. So we're getting 4 within the space of 6 months, which is crazy. So yeah, for me as a nerd, this is just ridiculously good because there's so much out there and so many different variety of stuff. You have Amazon doing stuff like Invincible and The Boys, the MCU are doing their thing, DC are doing their thing. There's so much to choose from now. And, it's like my Star Wars analogy of the buffet. Like, there's just so much to pick. And, like, if one thing's not for you, that's fine. I'm sure something else will come up for you that will tick all the boxes. So, yeah, it's just a great time to be, like, a superhero fan, a fan of pop culture. And, yeah, it's a gift to humanity.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think hopefully studios have learned their lesson in terms of giving the control to the creators, learning from the mistakes of the Snyder Cut. I know that there's obviously a lot of bad blood over at Warner Brothers, and it's something that you often quite talking about the news, especially over on Capes, Cowls, and Masks. So for everyone who wants to keep up with that kind of news and new trailers and everything, go check that out.
It's a weekly thing, the drama at Warner Brothers, honestly.
Yeah, and it's just quite infuriating in some ways.
It's basically just its own soap opera.
Yeah, essentially.
It is, yeah.
But also, I just hope that, we still keep to the traditional cinematic route, which Marvel has very much said that they want to do. DC seems to be somewhat committed to, while also building up HBO Max. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting time for comic book properties, and just to see how long it can withstand and, keep going, I suppose, in so many ways, because there'll be so much of it out there. But yeah, I think that they should have learned their lessons from what's happened with the likes of the Snyder Cut. But in terms of like New Mutants, I think that unfortunately and weirdly was just like the last whimper of the Fox X-Men universe, which is a weird way to go out. But we're going to be talking probably more about in their prime, I guess, especially as a cinematic universe, because the first 3 films were very much just traditional films that were all sequels to each other. They started to branch off, but it was mainly focused on Wolverine. And while these films still haven't done the Marvel formula of giving all these different characters their own solo films, it's very much in a post-Avengers kind of movie world in which these films are made and how they come across in terms of the characters that they're using and the stories that they're telling. So because X-Men First Class is celebrating its 10th anniversary as it came out on the 3rd of June 2011 over in the US, we thought what better time now to pick up from where last year we talked about the original trilogy and to talk about the Beginnings Trilogy, talking about X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, and X-Men Apocalypse. So yeah, we'll start off by talking about X-Men First Class. So we'll start off now with a clip from the movie.
We should think of code names. We're government agents now. We should have secret code names.
I want to be called Mystique.
Damn, I wanted to be called Mystique.
Well, tough. I called it.
Whoa! And I'm way more mysterious than you.
Darwin, what about you?
Well, Darwin's already a nickname and, sort of fits. Adapt to survive and all.
I'm going to be Banshee.
Why do you want to be named after a wailing spirit?
You might want to cover your ears. Your turn.
My stage name is Angel. Kind of fits.
You can fly?
Uh-huh. And,
Yep, some statue-destroying fun there with X-Men First Class. Kicking it all off at the very beginning, seeing Charles Xavier and Eric Lenscher. I've never said that surname before in my life. To me, he is just Magneto or Eric. I apologise. But seeing their early days where they're actually friends, teaming up with the CIA, trying to prevent nuclear war falling out in the time of the Cold War. So this was directed by Matthew Vaughn with story by Sheldon Turner and Bryan Singer, obviously of the original trilogy fame, and starring a brand new cast, so we get to see all of our favourite X-Men recast as younger versions. So you have James McAvoy as Professor X, you have Michael Fassbender as Magneto, you have Jennifer Lawrence as Raven or Mystique, you have Nicholas Hoult as Beast or Hank McCoy. But then you also have as the villain of all people Kevin Bacon as Sebastian Shaw, with also playing Moira from the CIA, Roseburn. So, how do we feel about it? Where should we start?
Yeah, well, I really like this movie. I think it's a colourful, smart, well-staged blockbuster. It makes really good use of the period style of the 60s. When I first heard that Fox were doing this and going back to the 60s, I was really intrigued because I thought, oh, that's, the era that the X-Men originated from. And I also like that it refocuses the series on its philosophical and social origins, because like the last couple of films, like The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine, they trailed off a bit and did some weird stuff that generally the fans weren't really happy with. So I liked that it sort of put the focus back on what makes the X-Men really interesting. And I also thought Matthew Vaughn did a great job directing. Like, I thought he was really taken with like the period aspects of the film, like taking place in 1962, was it? And then he's like he uses the Cuban Missile Crisis as like the backdrop of the film. So I thought, oh, that's really, really cool. And then I also really liked that he viewed the film as like an X-Men crossed with like an early James Bond style of film. Like, he filled the film with really stylish costumes, the attitude, and also a lot of direct references to like 60s filmmaking. Like, a lot of like the film was filmed in 60s style with like a lot of traditional framing and like toned down camera movements and editing. Like, it was sort of very stagnant a lot of places and basic. But I also really like that it's built around the relationship between Eric and Charles and expands on basically the debate that they have in the original trilogy. But we get to see sort of where that all sort of originates from. Although I do think there is something that does bug me about this film, is that you can clearly see that Matthew Vaughn wanted to completely reboot the franchise while Fox wanted to somehow connect it to the films that they originally did and make it like a sort of prequel. And I think you can see that in some of the direction and some of like the use of characters and story elements. Like, the opening scene is nearly straight up shot for shot of the opening scene in the first X-Men film with, younger Eric Lenscher in Auschwitz and stuff like that. So, and I think I was doing some research and I saw that Matthew Vaughn didn't really want to do that. He wanted to completely revamp these characters and take them in a new direction. So it's interesting to see what he would have done, free reign, but at the same time, it makes sense from a studio perspective, because at this time as well, in 2011, the MCU was full in gear. We were 1 year away from the Avengers. They were starting to tie up all these films, so I can understand why Fox would want to go, hey, let's do a prequels to the films we did and make them connect somehow, even though they actually shot themselves in the foot with the continuity, as we'll get on to later with Days of Future Past.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, hearing that, I think it came off for the better, because while at that time as well, reboots and prequels were quite a common thing within Hollywood, which they still are today, but there was a lot of that, especially with Spider-Man, etc., Batman, very much this kind of, let's go back to the basics, let's completely change these characters. And when I remember first seeing the photos of First Class and thinking, oh, Like, this looks completely different. This doesn't look like at all like the old X-Men films. And as somebody who grew up with those, there was a bit of hesitancy from that, and kind of looking at it like, well, who are these guys? You know, why is Mystique here? Why is she in like an X-Men outfit? You know, who's this Moira woman, etc. So I think ultimately, at the time especially, I think Days of Future Past has helped and Apocalypse to tie that all more in. But it also seemed a bit like they were happy to leave it as kind of like a light prequel, because they, depending on how it was received, they could still go off on their own tangent and not have to be too loyal to the original films at the same time. So they could kind of see how things went, which is almost how the making of the other films went as well, is that they were very much like, oh, well, we can use this time travel story to rewrite the specific films that people didn't like, etc. So I think that's interesting. But like you, Jake, I've said before, like, I'm a massive fan of Matthew Vaughn. I think that he adds a lot of style and a lot of flair to every project that he does. So I really appreciate the sort of 60s vibe, and they very much went with that as well. They were like, oh, let's put this film in the 70s and the 80s, and so they wanted to make that like a unique aspect of each movie, which I think is fun, and I think that it gives you that power to play with genre, as that's been successful with the likes of the MCU as well, of saying, well, we're going to have these different types of movies play out within a superhero world. So yeah, I also really like the sort of secret agent aesthetic, the 60s, how they're using real world events. That's something that's very much my jam. I really like when stories are able to do that, when they're able to take like a real world event and sort of flip it or put a fantasy science fiction element into it. So it still has that sort of grounded realism, but they can show how these characters can work within a real life situation. And I think something like the Cuban Missile Crisis is perfect, because one, it shows at a time in which the world was very scared of different forces and communism and all that kind of stuff. But there was also the conversation around nuclear weapons and the fact that mutants are born from like radiation. It just all makes sense to the villain's plans, and, you know, how Magneto comes into the fray, etc. So what I really appreciated here as well is that they really focused, as you said, Jake, on Charles and Eric's relationship. And I remember at the time as well, there was talks of, oh, there's going to be a Magneto origin film, and there's going to be the Wolverine one, which we did get. And it kind of seemed like they folded that Magneto story into this, which I was much more of a fan of, because I never thought the Magneto would really work as a prequel film. And it very much still is his film. Like the main theme, the music theme of the movie is his theme. And yeah, it very much becomes about him and Charles. But I think anybody watching it would say that his story is the driving force throughout that story. But it does work, because it means that Charles is there as somebody who would understandably become friends with him and be a strong person in his life, because he helps him to overcome some of the feelings of grief he has and overcoming some of the struggles he has with his powers. And I think they, expertly set up the formation of the school, how they work together, how they went and recruited different students, how they see the world differently, especially in that scene where they're playing chess. So I think all of that was really important, because when you then see it later play out in other films, if that was only done in like a matter of like 2 or 3 scenes, you wouldn't have got the sense of history and drama that you would have needed to get the emotional moments that come later on in this film and in the subsequent ones.
Another thing I'll say as well is that I've always said that as much as I like the Fox X-Men films, not all of them, but I still don't consider them X-Men films. Like I've always said, Fox don't make X-Men films. They make mutant films, because they've never quite gotten to the core, in my personal opinion, of who the X-Men are from the comics, the original source material. But I will say that I think First Class gets it the closest it's ever gotten.
So is that just about the idea of like actually watching the X-Men bonding with each other and training together and like getting to the idea of their characters?
Yeah, and all the thematic ideas and stuff like that. Like the original trilogy touches upon it, but it's, and sort of naughty style of filmmaking. They try to center it like an action film and follow like Wolverine's journey, which really isn't what the X-Men is about. And I understand at the time that's what you have to do, but I still think they've never truly made an X-Men film, which is why we'll talk about later why I'm very excited now that the MCU have got their hands on them. And also, like with the original trilogy, we all love Ian McKellen and Sir Patrick Stewart as Magneto and Charles Xavier. So it was a really tough sell going into this to think, how can you top those actors who were perfectly cast in those roles? And I think Fox absolutely nailed it with Fassbender and James McAvoy. Like, to perfectly cast these characters twice, that's almost unachievable, and I think they nailed it.
So, fun fact about this film, this is the first X-Men film I ever saw.
Oh, wow.
So, going back to last year's episode where I said I didn't watch any of those films as they came out. I only saw snippets of like Last Stand on TV, and it was literally for that episode was when I watched X-Men and X2 for the first time. Yeah, no, this is the film that started off any relationship I had with X-Men for me. So I'm just going to say that's why it's always going to have like a soft spot in my heart. But yeah, no, I also love this film. I think there's just a lot. I think there's just a lot about it which I get on board with. I think the fact that we see specifically some of the scenarios that like we see Eric in, I love his sort of like Manhunter stuff. The scene in Argentina in the bar is one of my absolute favorite scenes, especially where he's just talking to the men, just being like, "Oh, my parents didn't have names; they were taken away by pig farmers and tailors," and just drinking beer with them and just watching these men, just like, okay, what's happening? Absolute peak tension, and also just the scene at the end where Magneto takes over the helmet, and just the way they shoot that scene as well, I think is just incredible. What I also find interesting about this film is that wasn't the production history of this film like absolute hell? Like everything about it was just so rushed and suggested this film was going to be awful, and then it wasn't.
Yeah, I did find out some information about it because Bryan Singer was originally meant to direct this one, but then I'm not too sure exactly what happened, but he went on to do another project, and then they basically brought Matthew Vaughn in very last minute before they started shooting. But during production, apparently it was a very tight production. Like they started shooting in August of 2010, and then the film was released in May 2011, which is insane. Like it's
so close to a 12-month turnaround. And then, because I was watching a video about it, and they talked about it, and he just said, so yeah, you'd think that they're going into this, and then when you also see some of the things they have to overcome, that the film is just going to bomb, and yet they managed to get so many of the elements like just right. The fact that they get that chemistry between Charles and Eric down very, very, very quickly, even though the first time they meet is literally just swimming in the ocean, which is one of my favorite facets of the film. But yeah, I also just think that the way they introduced the the concept of the X-Men was quite smart. So just not trying to bombard, but just taking lesser known X-Men and just sort of playing around with them a bit, right? Even if they do Darwin absolutely dirty.
Yeah, I know. I know there's a lot of people out there, especially our friend Tom Jake, which is not a big fan of that. But apart from that, I think that that's something that I always enjoyed as well, is that they didn't go down the obvious route of, oh, let's, see a young Cyclops and a young Jean Grey, which one wouldn't make sense at all for the timeline. So probably that's the main reason they didn't do it. Obviously, they put Havoc in there as a kind of similar character to Cyclops, who's literally related to him.
But if they didn't give a damn, they would try and find some way of doing it, right? They would introduce them as like absolute children. Just something, they would just find a way of squidging it up.
Yeah, and which they did again in X-Men Origins. They were just like, oh, let's try and get Cyclops in here for no reason whatsoever. So, yeah, I always appreciated that they were kind of like a ragtag group of X-Men as well, and it kind of makes sense to the storyline that they're telling, that they don't have these ultra-powerful mutant characters. It very much feels, because of the spy element of it, it feels like this kind of kind of like almost like an Ocean's film or something, especially because when they're recruiting them, they've got like Niles Barkley playing, which is very fun and fitting of the 60s setting. But because all of those characters are kind of very like misfit rogue characters, I think that it makes sense and fits the whole kind of on the ground nature and the rookie element of them coming together, building this school. It's not in this kind of like idyllic way of being like, yes, I've got this massive like school with all this like fancy technology and they're doing all these like marvelous things that you would see in like an Avengers film with this high-tech facility. I kind of like that this kind of very on the ground, you know, when they're there training, getting ready, the way that they get Banshee ready for battle is literally just throwing him out of a window. So it just feels very of that time, and it just feels right in how you would set something up like that. It doesn't immediately start off as this big organization, and obviously they would need to build up to the whole a plane comes out of the basketball court idea. So I think that works for it. And yeah, I quite like the X-Men characters. Mystique is a bit shoehorned into this film and franchise as a whole. Again, I can see the studio mentality of being like, well, you know, it was Magneto and Mystique, so we need to bring her in. It was an opportunity to use Jennifer Lawrence, who was a big star at that time, but not really until Days of Future Past came along did she really rise to stardom, which we'll talk about later. But it is kind of odd how she turns out to be Charles's, you know, sister, etc., because there was just nothing ever in the franchise previous about that. So that's the most shoehorned aspect of it, whereas when you watch Magneto and Charles, we're not there going, oh, you didn't suggest they were friends before, because obviously that's always been an element of their relationship. So whereas the Mystique stuff is kind of strange. And like I said, even when I saw the original poster and the teasers of the film, I was kind of like, I was like, is that Mystique? I was like, why is she in this like yellow jumpsuit? What's going on here? But I really like Banshee. I think that his power's always fun. I don't know why. I always like characters that have that sort of sonic scream, and I think this played in a fun way so that he can use the sort of squirrel wings to fly around, etc. Obviously, you see Beast comes in quite an interesting way. Jennifer Lawrence does get to use her powers in quite effective ways. I think probably then for the other mutants, maybe the villain side has a few more interesting ones, like Azazel is quite interesting. The powers of Emma Frost are quite cool. Not so sure about January Jones in the role. But again, she kind of fits the whole 60s aesthetic they're going with, of this kind of Charlie's Angels kind of ridiculous woman in, you know, like a cape and knee-high boots and then just a very skimpy outfit, etc. So it kind of fits that vibe, but it wasn't really ideal for going forward with the character.
I just wanted to sort of expand upon like the relationship between Charles and Eric, and just in general, like Charles's like role within this film, because I think my favorite scene or like sort of part within the film is the training montage. Like, I love how like Charles is telling each team member precisely what they need to hear so they can reach their full potential. And for me, it's the moment between him and Eric, you know, when he first holds the gun, he's like, yeah, come on, do it. He's like, I can't do it. And he says, well, if you know you can do it, then you're not challenging yourself. And then when he asks him to move the satellite dish, and then that moment is so emotional because he can't do it. And then Xavier's like, I'm just going to look, he brings him back that memory of his mother. And then the acting in Michael Fassbender's face, like you see the raw emotion coming in. And then obviously it turns into that meme that everybody like is sharing now of like, this is me explaining something. But it's such a powerful emotional moment as he moves the satellite. And then that smile on Eric's face, like that big, you know, iconic Fassbender smile really comes through. And it's just so powerful, and probably my favorite part of the film.
Yeah, it's a really great element that they focused on with James McAvoy's Xavier, is that idea of finding what is special about that character and that person's powers, and him sort of finding the endearing elements of them, him latching onto them, which I thought was really effective.
Yeah, I enjoyed all of the moments that the X-Men had with that, especially Banshee, where they literally just throw him off a satellite dish and expect him to fly. Although I found it weird watching it, because for a while I forgot the other characters that Caleb Landry Jones has played. So I was just like, where have I seen him before? And then when I went back and realised which films I recognised him from, I was like, oh, well, he definitely had a great career after this, so fair play to him. For those who, he was the racist son in Get Out. And he was also the junior like police cop in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Oh. So I was like, Jesus Christ! Like, so you've gone from playing Banshee, like I was just like, okay, like, I'm glad I recognise this guy. Then just see what he's done afterwards. Just like, why have you just been typecast as just a bit of a douche? Like, what's going on?
I did always appreciate that he did play this kind of, because he plays this kind of like charmer kind of guy, and you know, he's there with, like, obviously he's unsuccessful with the woman he's trying to pull in the aquarium of all places, but I kind of liked that it was a bit more refreshing. It was a bit different for a character who is like a redhead and sort of like skinny and everything. I was like, oh, this is nice, you know, it's a nice change of pace rather than him just playing the sort of, like I said, potentially douchey character or like a sort of more nerdy character. So I appreciated that. And it was kind of the same with Havoc, I guess, in a way that he was, you know, he is a bit of a bully to sort of Beast, but at the same time he was very like reserved and very quiet, which I thought was a nice sort of change of pace as well for that kind of jock kind of character. I think he's played by Lucas Till, so I think that his powers and everything work quite well. And like you, Jake, I think that in that training sequence, I also love, because that really starts off the entire journey, which again, what works, I think, about this trilogy is that you can tell that they've watched the previous film and not just gone, oh yeah, I watched the previous film, but they've made notes of what the specific themes were in that and what was strong about it and continued it on into the next entry. So in this film especially, they have the idea of balancing your rage with sincerity, which is what Charles brings up in that moment. He says, you know, there's a middle ground between sincerity and rage, and I think that is a great lesson that he teaches Eric, and yeah, it's just a good theme that carries on throughout this entire story, because you see it in the next film and you see it in Apocalypse as well. In terms of the powers as well, I do find it quite funny that at the end in the beach scene, that when they have to sort of take out Havoc, his like disc gets taken off and he's just wandering around with his chest out. Like, I was just like, it looks so weird. Like at the end of the film, he's just there with just a hole in his top. It's like, it looks so weird.
If we're going to talk about like that final act, how about that Michael Fassbender all of a sudden goes to his native Irish accent when he's giving that speech at the
end.
True. I suppose he wanted the passion there.
Yeah, proper came through.
I'm genuinely surprised he never said, they need to be lucky every single day, we need to be lucky once. Because, like, that accent just came out of nowhere.
It's so weird, so random.
Are you FBI? No, you're not cops. Hey, what's with this gift to Youngster's place?
That's an old cart.
Well, he's fascinating.
He's a pain in the ass.
What, a teleporter?
No, he says fast. And when I know him, he wasn't so young.
Young? You're just old.
So you're not afraid to show your powers?
Powers? What powers? What are you talking about? You see something strange here? Nothing anybody would believe if you told them. So who are you? What do you want?
We need your help, Peter.
What?
Break into a highly secured facility and get someone out.
Prison break? That's illegal, you know.
Well, only if you get caught.
So what's in it for me?
You kleptomaniac, get to break into the Pentagon.
How do I know I can trust you?
Because we're just like you.
Sure, man. It's cool. It was disgusting.
So yes, this was X-Men Days of Future Past, which came out in 2014, released in the USA on the 23rd of May. It is directed by Bryan Singer with writers Simon Kinberg, credited with the screenplay, along with Jane Goldman, also on the story, along with Simon Kinberg and Matthew Vaughn as well. It's based off, obviously, the characters created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. It stars a very big cast, some of which, just to name a few, are Hugh Jackman as Logan, James McAvoy as Charles Xavier, Michael Fassbender as Eric Lencher, Jennifer Lawrence as Raven/Mystique, and then we've got in the inclusion of some of the classic cast. We've got Halle Berry as Storm, we've got Elliot Page as Kitty Pryde, you've got Shawn Ashmore back as Bobby/Iceman. You got some new players coming in here. You got Omar Sy as Bishop. You get Evan Peters, as we just heard, as Peter/Quicksilver. And then, of course, you've got Magneto, who's played by Ian McKellen, the older version, and Patrick Stewart, who's playing the older version of Professor X. And you got Nicholas Hoult as the young version of Hank/Beast. And you also got Peter Dinklage as Bolivar Trask. So yeah, basically this story takes the whole time travel element that has been somewhat a part of the X-Men past in terms of comics, but has never really been explored in terms of the films. They sort of change things up a lot here, similar to the Marvel films. They take the concept of the comic book storyline, but very much adapt it for their own films and their cinematic universe. So very much being a very light adaptation of Days of Future Past. So it sees that the X-Men are in a kind of post-apocalyptic world in which they're being hunted by the Sentinels and the humans, in which the world is sort of ravaged and the mutants are on the run and almost become extinct. We get a few of our classic X-Men characters who have survived, and their only then way to stop all of this by happening is using Kitty Pryde, who's got the ability to send people into the past, into their old bodies, to change the past so that it rewrites the future, essentially. So the plan is to send Wolverine, because he's got his healing abilities, that he won't be ripped to shreds, as they sort of put it, by going that far back into the past. And he can change this pivotal moment within history, which was when Mystique killed Trask, which then triggered the entire chain of events of them making the Sentinel program. So the idea is hopefully to bring Charles and Eric together at a time at which they couldn't be further apart, as Ian McKellen says, to bring Mystique back into the fold and convince her not to kill Trask, so it doesn't start that entire chain of events. So for me, I always remember seeing this in the cinema. It was a massive deal because of, as we've discussed before, the original X-Men films were a big part of my childhood and so growing up as a teenager, etc. And I very much enjoyed First Class, so it was bringing those two worlds together. And because we had the Avengers come out in 2012, then you could tell a lot of studios would clamber in to try and get their own cinematic universes, their own team-up films. And really, Fox was the only one who could come along and say, yeah, we can legitimately do this without it feeling shoehorned in or rushed, because they did have a bunch of films and characters that they had already established. And yes, while it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of the timeline, I can excuse all that for what this film gives us, because it marries the two worlds really well, I think. Obviously, they brought back Bryan Singer, which we mentioned with First Class. None of this talking about either this film or Apocalypse. We're going to condone the way that he works. We've heard a lot of bad things about the way he acts on sets. He left Bohemian Rhapsody, and also he has some very serious allegations put against him. So anything we're talking about in terms of these films now is very much in the vein of, respecting these films as a standalone piece of art, and for everyone else who is involved in the project, not so much a work of Bryan Singer himself. And I think that is very much the case here, because it wouldn't really succeed without such a tremendous cast, and without, Simon Kinberg, who I'll give a lot of credit, despite the problems I think that he caused within Dark Phoenix. I think that he does manage to make a really tight and really effective story here. And I think that they bring in the two worlds quite well, because when this film was originally in production and they were talking about it, you were like, oh, I don't know, that sounds like a lot for one film. But I think that they do really make it work. I think the action scenes really stand out. And while you said, Jake, that maybe First Class was the closest to the X-Men, in some ways this, to me, is kind of the closest as well, because it's very much of that Saturday morning cartoon vibe, but also it's all purple laser beams and teleporting, and the mutants using their powers together in a way that makes them effective as a team. We see it a lot more maybe with the future stuff, but also just that classic theme of, you know, Charles versus Eric, their ideologies constantly clashing. And I just love that idea of a future Magneto is with the good guys, if you will, trying to right the wrongs of his past and the past in general. And without him even knowing, he's become a villain to himself. I just love the Magneto comes along, here's what's happening, and in full Magneto style goes like, I need to take control of this, and I see this now as an attack on our people, and this is how we need to progress with it. So it's just fascinating to me that Magneto as a character is almost triggering his own inclusion in the past and almost undoing everything that the future Magneto is trying to do. He's like ruining everything for them. And that's what's so great about the ending of this film. It's very much like X2, that kind of like, right, we've stopped the humans now. Oh, but Magneto has come in and ruined everything by taking over the entire situation. Which I think works really well. So the future stuff works for me really well. The action is amazing. I think the Sentinels, I think that they brought those in really effectively as well. I think that they changed them up enough from the comics and the cartoons to be quite fresh and quite new. And I think that all of the characters and the performances are really great within this. I think a lot of people make the mistake of saying that Hugh Jackman or Wolverine is like the main character in this film. And I've never felt that. I think that he's more like the guide to the audience within this. And it very much is Charles, Mystique, and Eric's story. And Charles especially takes like a big main role within this film. And Wolverine doesn't really have any major cause and effect to the plot apart from just like helping to change the past. But he doesn't really have like a character arc or anything like that like Charles does. So that to me is refreshing, is that even though some people would say, oh, I get sick of Wolverine, why is it always about Logan, etc., but I don't really feel that he steals the spotlight in this film. They just use him in a very effective way of saying, hey, this guy can heal, let's put him in the past, in which a time in which he would have been alive and he would have pretty much looked the same, etc. And obviously we get the whole bone claws and stuff like that, which is quite fun as well. So yeah, and I think that they really embraced again the aesthetic. I think they managed to carry over what worked with Matthew Vaughn's style and aesthetic as well and add that to the 70s element, but they also made the future stuff very standalone and very unique as well. So it was not like anything we had seen. It wasn't like Avengers. It wasn't like other superhero team-ups. So yeah, I just think that this works really well as an overall story. It's a very fun adventure. Lots of characters brought in there, but with some really dramatic moments and some great music, etc. as well. Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely love this film. This is my favorite of the three by quite a stretch as well. This is by far the superior film. And I remember one specific memory when this film came out, because when I went to go see it in the cinema, I remember seeing like the posters of like, you know, what films they were showing and coming soon. And I remember seeing currently playing Captain America, the Winter Soldier, now playing X-Men Days of Future Past, and upcoming Amazing Spider-Man 2. Well, we won't talk about that film, and Guardians of the Galaxy. And I remember seeing those four posters and I was like, wow, what a world. We're finally there as like nerds, that we're getting all these superhero films being made by all different movie studios as well, not just one studio. And it was at that point I was like, wow, okay, we're ramping this up. This is here to stay. So I have that specific memory of going to see Days of Future Past. And yeah, I think while you say that this is like more true to the X-Men because of like the concept of like the wackiness and like the lasers and all that sort of crazy aesthetic stuff, I completely agree with you. I do think like this is a really big, bold, like confident follow-up to First Class. I think more like First Class is more true to the X-Men in terms of character dynamics and like the relationship between the characters. But in terms of like action, visual aesthetics, and all the craziness going on with time travel, absolutely, Days of Future Past took that first step into that world. And then I think Apocalypse takes that further step, because at the time, you know, the Fox films, they were trying to ground them in a sense, you know, in a form of reality. And I think they saw the success of the MCU and how they were balancing grounding stuff with heightened reality and the big spectacle. So they thought, oh, let's go ahead and try that. And I think they successfully, like you said, they've merged the two worlds together. Like, they've got a lot of comic book inspired elements, like, you know, dystopian future, time travel, big fights showcasing lots of powers. I love the opening scene where, you know, the use of the portals and all the members are like going through the different portals and stuff like that. Bishop's awesome. Like his weapon that just get powered up by absolutely anything is really sick. And for me though, like, I think it manages to bring in the older cast from the original trilogy, but it really smartly does it because it doesn't lose focus on like the newer cast. And I agree with you, Dave. This is not a Logan film. This is, for me, it's a Charles film who gets the majority of screen time, I think, both new and old, and he has the most thorough arc throughout the film. But for me, I think like the highlight has got to be Evan Peters. Like, he absolutely shines in the role of Quicksilver. Like, the Pentagon High scene is probably one of my favorite moments. It's such a fun sequence, and it ends with like the standout moment of the film as he does like the slow motion thing while he's listening to what song was it? Time in a Bottle. It's just such a joyous, exciting scene as he's like, you know, trying out the different food, poking the guns in the people's faces. It's just so good. And I found out as well that they actually recorded that. Like, the live action stuff was recorded in 3,200 frames per second. So it was moving, all the live action stuff, just moving extremely slowly. So I really like that sort of use of filmmaking there. And again, as I said, like with First Class, my favorite scene is Charles and Eric, you know, reuniting, and that scene when they're on the plane and they're having that game of chess. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And Eric is trying to, you know, bring Charles out and say what's going on, and they have that big discussion. He's like, you left me, and all this sort of thing. Like, it was absolutely emotional. And I think we'll get into Apocalypse later, but what's great about First Class and Days of Future Past is the connection between Eric and Charles, which I think sort of they lose a bit in Apocalypse. So that's why it was really nice to see that here front and center again. And as well, like, I gotta talk about the music, because the opening sequence, like, it just took me back to my childhood of, you know, Bryan Singer's sort of opening style is going through, you know, that, you know, the wires and the like the membrane of the brain and stuff, like all this sort of cool stuff with the music of John Ottman, that classic X-Men theme, and seeing that in motion, it just sort of took me back to my childhood. I was like, yeah, the X-Men sort of thing. And it's also just one of my favorite like musical superhero themes is that John Ottman X-Men theme. Dun, 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 dun. It's just so good and gets me pumped every time I watch one of those films when that theme comes on. So yeah, this is a stunning film. All the performances are great. The Sentinels are cool. Like, as a fan of like the X-Men animated series, it was cool to see them in there. I will say though, I wasn't too keen on the design of like the future Sentinels, the ones that like morph and do all that sort of stuff. I love the look of the 70s ones, like the more sort of robotic style, and they got like the fans on their chest and stuff like that. So that was really cool. But I wasn't too sure on the futuristic ones. Don't know. They looked kind of weird to me. But yeah, top marks for this film. I have very little criticism to say.
I also have to agree. I think it's a great film. Trying to think what I can say that hasn't actually been covered by you two motor mouths. One thing I'm curious to have people's opinions on, which is basically about the inclusion of the older cast, because I did see a video that basically did like essentially a rewrite of the film in a way that they would have liked to have seen the film go. Because as much as it is good to see the future cast, and they obviously don't overpower what is meant to be like the main aspect of the story, which is basically trying to sort out the situation in the past. The the video creator did feel that the future cast didn't really have like an awful lot to do apart from just basically exist in a situation where essentially they only exist to basically buy time, and they don't necessarily have a lot to do of their own accord. Is basically we just see them trying to like fight and survive, which I can see that perspective to a certain extent. I'm just curious as to what you guys sort of think about that idea.
That is one of my criticisms, is maybe just that you don't get quite enough of the future aspects. But at the same time, it's kind of one of those that you don't want too much of a good thing, because I really love the look of that. And because they place it in this like singular location, they kind of create the story in which it doesn't really give them scope to go anywhere else with it. Maybe it would have been nice to have some more of like them helping other mutants, or them just discussing different elements of what has happened to them over the years. But we also saw with the road cut that then that doesn't work overly well at the same time. So I think that like I really love that visually, like like I saw Tibetan, is it like?
Yeah, they're in China, aren't they? I swear that because you see the Great Wall. I think they pass
Yeah. So that temple that they have with like the multicolored bottles and stuff, I think makes for a stunning location. So it works really well when you see Charles meet past Charles. You have that gorgeous scene. You have that beautiful piece of music, which is called Hope from John Ottman as well. So not only does he have that fantastic X-Men opening, but he also brings in like great musical moments like Hope and the music that plays during that opening. So, but I also appreciate that the future stuff just adds to the tension and to this idea of like we're constantly on the run and we've only just arrived here and they've already found us again. It kind of brings in the excitement and anticipation I had from the opening, which I, like Jake, I absolutely love that opening. And I think that the action beats and the visuals you see within that are just so great and so striking. I think that it just makes me forgive it, because I'm also enjoying the stuff in the past so much as well. I think because the past has also got a lot of great action moments going on as well, which you wouldn't think, but because you haven't got the kind of crazy sci-fi stuff, but you've got Magneto lifting an entire stadium, for God's sake, and you've got all the stuff with the previous Sentinels and him taking control of them, and all the the president and the White House. All of that is still really fun. So I think that bouncing back and forth does really work, and it kind of just works for me in the element of like, we need to buy ourselves time. It just adds to that tension and to that post-apocalyptic feel of like we're without hope. So I think in some ways, if they had stretched that out too much, it kind of would have lost some of the great qualities of what makes that story so dynamic and so fast-paced.
I think all I can suggest then is, because I'm not going to explain it because it was a very detailed sort of rewrite video, but if you can go at some point, go and watch the Just Right video on rewriting Days of Future Past, to see what he thinks the film could have looked like, just to have an idea. Because I don't think I'll just say up front now, it's not a case of stretching out what we get from the future stuff. It is changing it so that the relationship that the X-Men actually have in that story makes them more proactive. But you'd have to watch the video in order to understand exactly what I mean.
If there's one criticism I would say that's film, is that because you are dealing with time travel and because you're 10 years after the last film, there seems to be a lot of exposition at times. Like there was times where there's just spouting information about what's happened, and I'm just like, okay, that person's been doing this and this person's been doing that. So I feel at times that it loses that sort of feeling of direct sequel, if you know what I mean. Like, unlike the original trilogy, which each one literally followed upon the story and the themes as they went along within a short amount of time, this one is 10 years, and then again 10 years between all of them. It's hard to like really connect all the character arcs because so much has changed in their lives, especially that we find out that Magneto is in prison for supposedly attempting to kill JFK, which I actually found out that Matthew Vaughn was keen to stay on to do the X-Men franchise. Like, after First Class, he like sort of penned out 2 more movies that he was going to make a trilogy, and like he actually wanted to make a sequel still within the 60s. Like, he wanted to incorporate JFK's assassination, the civil rights movement, Vietnam War. So reading upon this, what he had planned, I would have been really interested to see what Matthew Vaughn would have done had he stayed on. But for whatever reason, it didn't work, and he left on to do the Kingsman films. So
it definitely felt like there was a film missing in between this and Days of Future Past, because obviously we find out so many facets, like how many of the original mutants died in horrific circumstances and apparently were experimented on to such a degree that Charles gives up on his dreams and just suppresses his powers and just basically drinks all day. Like, that's just a lot of characterization they're expecting us to buy into straight away. Honestly, I'm surprised this was never... Because if you look at it in, like, the order of, like, the actual trilogy, well, for a while, trilogy that we get, it's surprising that this wasn't, like, the culmination. Like, the fact that this is the second film in the trilogy just seems a bit bizarre. Because obviously if they just go, okay, so the first film is setting things up, the second film is completely changing every way that we view an entire series of films. The third one's the sequel. Like, it struck me as odd as the sort of placement of that, but at the same time, given, I don't know, at that time I wasn't really following up for the, oh yeah, what film are we getting next? To the point I was just like, oh cool, we got this, and then when it was like Apocalypse is announced, I was like, okay, yeah, fine, whatever.
But I think James McAvoy does a really good job of selling it, though, through his performance, though. I think, once again, James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender kill it in the roles, but especially James McAvoy, because it is his story. And also the best use of the F-bomb ever.
That annoys me, because they get the quote wrong. So when he's just like, I remember you, we approached you in a bar, so I'm going to tell you what you told me all those years ago. And then he just says, F*** off. Every time I just go, I think you'll find what I said was go F*** yourselves. I'm just like, come on.
Exactly. I was giving them credit earlier for always watching the previous film and saying they're like carrying on the themes and stuff. But I was like, seriously, guys, did you not just like look at the
But
scene?
they didn't watch the film that they were in.
Yeah, exactly. You also get a lot of, like, because there are so many people in this film, like, I find... I do feel sorry for the guy who plays, like, Colossus, for example. I think the only line he has is just going, Mystique. And, like, that's all he says. And I'm pretty sure there's another character in there, which I'm like, does he say anything at all? Like, I don't think he says, like, a single line.
Is it the fire guy?
Sunspot. No, he does say, like, one or two things, I think. But, yeah, there was another character which I was like, I'm not sure if they say anything during this film.
Colossus gets his due, though. Like, he gets a pretty sweet deal in coming up.
Yeah, like I said, I really love, like Jake said, I love the opening. I think that I dig the Sentinel look in that because, again, it made it very futuristic. And I love how they sold it at the beginning, showing one is being surrounded by ice, one's being surrounded by fire. And they immediately sell you on this idea of they adapt and they learn your powers. So then showing the other uses the fire to overcome the ice and the other uses the ice to overcome the fire. I just think that is just perfect. I love that. And yeah, the Blink, that I just dig that power so much. I want to see Blink turn up in another X-Men film again because she is so cool. Just the way they use it, just constantly making portals and like lasers coming through different places. Colossus getting that moment where he gets to dive down through one. It's so awesome. And like you, Jake, as well, I think Bishop is really cool. I think he really makes sense within that. And I really like Omar Sy as him. I would love to see Omar Sy come back as Bishop, to be honest, because I think I really like him as an actor anyway. But yeah, I think that he really works well within the X-Men sort of universe. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And I really liked, like I said, all the music within it, all the like cinematic moments. Also the costumes. I just have to quick mention to Magneto's costume. I think that is the best Magneto costume in any of the films, to be honest. I know that everyone would always love to see the sort of pink and red that we kind of see a bit at the end of First Class, but it does look a bit goofy. But the Days of Future Past one, I would wear that. That looks so cool. I love his helmet. It just looks so classy. And to me, just to finally talk about Charles and Magneto, to me, after First Class, I was like, yeah, Michael Fassbender is Magneto. Like, he perfectly replicates Ian McKellen when he isn't doing like an Irish accent, but he gets it. And like, I can see him becoming Magneto perfectly, and especially the fact that you get to see them both in the same film. It wasn't until this film that I was really sold on McAvoy as Patrick Stewart. I was sold on him as Xavier, but when you get that crossover of the characters and their meeting, again, while you don't sort of see it physically as much as you do with Fassbender, and not so much in the way that they speak and act, he just embodies so much about the character that the sort of magic thing that happened at the end of this film when I first saw it in the cinema, and this is why this was such a great cinematic experience to me, because of all the amazing action sequences. But that moment where Logan is there at the end and he walks up to Xavier and he says, "Oh, you're back," or something like that. I just was like overwhelmed, like, oh my God, that is James McAvoy, like in Patrick Stewart's body. I don't know what it was about that moment, but the story and the emotion of it had all built me up to be like fully like, that is James McAvoy in Xavier's body. There's something about Patrick Stewart's performance and the way that the story led you up to that moment that I fully believed that was the same guy, and that Patrick Stewart was channeling James McAvoy's Xavier. I just thought it was amazing. Since I've rewatched it, I'm like, okay, maybe I was so caught up in the emotions of the moment at the cinema, but still, it's amazing how they were able to achieve that through the story and through their performances.
Always the same. And now all this. No more stones. No more spears. No more slings. No more swords. No more weapons. No more systems. No more. No more superpowers.
What the hell's going on? Who's turning the keys?
We've lost contact with all Trident and Polaris subs.
The Air Force is reporting the same thing.
So much faith in there. Tools in there. Machines.
Russia, China, England, Israel, India. Everybody's got nukes in the air.
You can fire your arrows from the Tower of Babel, but you can never strike gold!
So yes, that we are now talking about X-Men Apocalypse, which was released in 27th of May 2016 in United States. Bryan Singer once again returns to direct, and once again Simon Kinberg returns to write it. Most of the main cast all return. James McAvoy as Professor Charles Xavier, Michael Fassbender as Magneto, Jennifer Lawrence as Raven, Nicholas Hoult as Hank McCoy. But we also get the main villain, En Sabah, also known as Apocalypse, played by Oscar Isaac. And we also get the return of Rose Byrne as Moira McTaggart. But wait, there's more. We also get introduced to the new generation of X-Men as Sophie Turner comes in to play Jean Grey, Ty Sheridan comes in to play Scott Summers, Alexandra Shipp comes in to play Aurora Monroe / Storm, Ben Hardy's Angel, Olivia Munn is Cyclops. Like, this cast is probably the biggest cast out of all the three films. It is definitely probably the biggest in terms of scope of all the three films, but I would say this is probably the weakest, or at least has the most problems out of the three films, and it's definitely a controversial film. But I would say this is definitely the most simplest film in terms of story compared to the other two. Basically, Apocalypse, known as En Sabanor, is worshipped as a god since the dawn of civilization. We see him in ancient Egypt, and he's like the first and most powerful mutant. But basically, he gets trapped after the citizens of Egypt attempt a coup, and for 3,200 years he has slept, and finally he is awoken by this terrorist group who are following En Sabanor. Event like Moira McTaggart gets involved, the sun comes in and which resurrects him somehow. I'm not too sure how the sun and that pyramid things works. And then he basically is disheartened with the world, thinking that it's all relying on machines and technology and superpowers, and he basically attempts to cleanse the world, and only the strong mutants will survive, and he will want to, from the ashes of this world, he will build a better one, and in attempting that, he recruits Magneto, Psylocke, Angel, and who am I missing? Storm as his 4 horsemen, and then Charles Xavier and the X-team all unite to try and stop him. So yeah, as I said, there's not really, in terms of plot, the complexity of it, but at the same time, they're throwing a lot in this movie that causes a bit of unevenness, I think. Even though this film is probably the most critiqued out of these 3 films, I will say that I think this film gets a bad rap. Like, basing this film around the villain Apocalypse was not only a great choice, but one of the most unabashedly comic booky things they could have done. Like, Days of Future Past, as I said, was that first step into like the visual aspect of doing all these crazy things. And I think when you bring in a villain like Apocalypse, you're really embracing the comic book roots, sort of like pulp type of serialized storytelling villains who are like ha 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 sort of thing. You know, I'm going to take over the world. So within that, people had a lot of criticisms, but I actually really enjoyed that. I felt as if X-Men by this point was due for a big comic book style end of the world movie, and I thought Apocalypse was the perfect villain to do that. Like, it doesn't try to reinvent the superhero movie, it just simply takes the formula, follows it to the letter, and it lets the results speak for itself. Like, at times, it really feels like several episodes of the 90s animated show come to life, in my opinion. There's a lot of destruction, devastation. It's over the top, excessive at times, but it's also really appropriate for the character of Apocalypse. And even though the actor himself, Oscar Isaac, may not have had the best of time playing this character, I will say I really appreciate Oscar Isaac's performance in this. His voice that he's doing, like machines, you know, and how he changes in tone and all that sort of stuff. I found him intimidating, but also charming. Like his use of basically every power, how he can enhance humans. One of my favorite scenes is when he's talking to Magneto in Auschwitz, and he's like, feel the metal in the ground, really unlocking Magneto's true potential. So yeah, what do you guys think of this film? Because I know like this is one of the most criticized X-Men films out there.
So I will say that when I first saw it, I remember it not having much of an impact apart from like a handful of scenes. I think you're right, there's definitely something about it which, in terms of comparing to like the other films in the trilogies thus far, it definitely has like a feeling of standardness about it. So there were just elements of it that I didn't necessarily get into. On rewatch, literally this afternoon, it's better than I remembered it. There was a lot I appreciated about it. I think, obviously, the main thing that I remembered in both viewings was the story they did with Magneto, even if I am ever so slightly confused about how necessarily that sort of story would have come up. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think his wife was a mutant.
No, I don't think so.
No. Yeah, which to me I was a bit like, that's what I would have liked to have seen with him instead of just randomly giving him a family just to kill them again. Just actually see what it is about humanity he was willing to be like, you know, actually there's something here, whether or not it was something because obviously being back in Poland, having closer ties to like his heritage, and we know how much his heritage meant to him, even to the point that like everything he believed about mutants and the war to be true in the first film, he was still willing to kill Shaw because he killed his mother, who presumably wasn't a mutant, but he does care about that. I just remember like that element of the story being like quite heartbreaking. I basically forgot that Moira was in this film. I'm not gonna like. That's how very little she seemed to have done. Apart from just obviously investigating, I completely forgot she was there. So when she popped up in my rewatch, I was like, "Oh hey, Rose Byrne's back. That's cool." Probably the hindsight of watching it directly after First Class as well, I was able to just sort of carry that through. I thought like the new cast were quite fun. You know, basically just seeing like this slow interaction, and you get some conversations like you had with like the original mutants. So you have Scott with the target and basically getting him used to the eyesight and scenes like that, which were quite cool. Yeah, I think there's just a lot of it which is just like I think it's competently made, but like there weren't that many scenes that sort of like cried out to me as like, oh my god, this is overwhelmingly powerful. Even just like scenes of like Magneto sort of ripping things out of the earth and basically just completely just destroying the sort of makeup of the globe. I think it was cool up until the point, and then a lot of it just looked like just sort of standard destruction. There wasn't anything that screamed out like, oh yeah, this is more world-shattering than like anything we're sort of used to. And I think even they sort of buy into this idea of sort of that element as well, because they just go for because they also have another Quicksilver scene, which, while good, obviously doesn't stand anywhere as near as strong as the first scene from Days of Future Past. Whether it's just because the song they choose isn't as good because it's Sweet Dreams, or the fact that it's just longer, and also just has the bittersweet ending of just like, oh yeah, Havoc's now gone, just out of nowhere. It's like, oh, okay. But yeah, no, there's definitely a lot to enjoy with this, and obviously this film is pivotal because this is where James McAvoy finally dons the bald head role of Charles Xavier, which is also quite pivotal there. But yeah, that's sort of like my sort of stance on the film.
Yeah, I think that's the bittersweet thing about this, is that you get to the end with, you have, you know, bald Charles, but also I think for me it encapsulated so much of what that film was trying to do. It very much is the most Saturday morning cartoon of all of the X-Men films potentially, which I really enjoy. And I think at the same time it's kind of the same criticisms that have been thrown at things like the kaiju films, in which people are just saying, oh, it's just this big dumb CGI fest. But at the same time, for something like Godzilla, King of the Monsters, I always said that was taking on very much, well, a lot of those modern Godzilla films are taking on the kind of disaster film aesthetics and going with this end of the world, showing you the military and the humans that are affected, and this complete and utter destruction in which it's just seen from like a grand scale, kind of similar to what you might get in like, you know, Zack Snyder with like his Man of Steel, etc., rather than looking at like this individual smaller situation. It's this kind of battle of gods. So I felt that was an element here, especially we kind of get that from that scene with Apocalypse, because when I was watching it, I was kind of thinking, oh, I don't know, is this quite working? It's a bit gimmicky. There's a lot of story threads going on. I'm not sure if I'm digging the kind of Apocalypse stuff. But once I saw that scene, I was like, right, I get it now. This is more like, you know, they're trying to be more like a disaster film, because he literally is, you know, he's taking all the rockets up and he's so commentating on the way that humanity has progressed, and he wants to reshape it. And we get that with the pulling the metal out of the ground as well, which I think, I agree with Craig. I think it's quite cool as a idea. I wasn't too fussed on the idea of doing it in Auschwitz. Something about that just morally was a bit cloudy for me. I was a bit like, I don't know about this. It's like I kind of like that for the beauty of the what happened to Magneto and the gates being bent, etc. I understand story-wise why they're there.
It makes sense narratively why Apocalypse would choose that place to manipulate Magneto. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm just surprised that the people in charge of the film were like, yeah, I don't know if this is morally right to do, to take this place of this great tragedy and just literally rip it all apart. You know, just historically, that place is quite, a very, precious kind of tragic place.
It's a contentious issue, but there's a lot of situations where a lot of people advocate for the destruction of places like that, not necessarily that place. But some people do say it stands as sort of like a symbol of power for those sort of hatred anyway, so...
it might just be the
issue,
idea of them being there in the first place. It's that kind of idea of taking a selfie as Auschwitz. I'm always just a bit like... It just makes me a bit uneasy when they sort of place these storylines there.
Also, let's be fair, films have decided to destroy a lot more insensitive things than that, so... At least there was thematic relevance for them actually being there anyway, right? Especially considering when it happens in the story. As opposed to insert many disaster films where they just randomly destroy places because lol destruction. So, I definitely agree there was something you have to think about whether or not it's okay to do this, but I didn't come out at the end going like, yeah, they shouldn't have done it. I think for the sake of the story... it made sense.
The bittersweet element for me is also the fact that you at the end see like, oh, these are the more traditional looking X-Men, like the 90s kind of looks. You see Ty Sheridan, you see Storm, you see Nightcrawler, so in their traditional costumes, etc. They look like the X-Men. They've got their individual looks. They're not in these just kind of boring pilot suits that they have throughout this film. And it just was then weird that then they went, okay, let's ignore all that in the next film, and just went with uniform again and went for a very specific X-Men look from a very completely different storyline to the Dark Phoenix storyline. So, yeah, it just, that to me ended like, oh my God, yes, they're really embracing now the X-Men, and it's just weird that they didn't carry that on.
That's what I mean. I thought it ended perfectly. Even though the timeline had changed because of Days of Future Past, I still, in a way, thought it thematically led up perfectly to the first X-Men film, you could say. Maybe not with the addition of Nightcrawler, but, Jean Grey, Storm, Cyclops, and all of that. I was like, great, now you can watch X-Men, the first one, straight after this, in a way.
Although, two things quickly. One, on the flight suits. I love how David said, like, oh yeah, they just basically opted for boring flight suits, when literally that is what they do. They just go, oh, there are pilot suits here, let's just chuck them on. But the other thing as well, and I think this is one of I think this is why I didn't enjoy it the first time round as much, because it has that sort of consequence issue, because obviously this comes after Days of Future Past, and at the end of Days of Future Past we see the sort of like up to time version of all the characters, and it's just like, does it then rob any films that come after of the tension of, are they going to make it out of these situations, because we know that all of these characters are okay? Which I think, given that I didn't rewatch Days of Future Past right before this, I think that sort of weakened that sort of stance for me, because I was able to just enjoy it for like the actual consequences it laid out in front of me, instead of thinking about it in the realm of, well, what does any of this actually matter, because we know that everything's gonna be fine. Obviously I think Dark Phoenix does a couple of things to sort of try to reintroduce consequences by messing with some of that ending a little bit.
Makes it even more confusing then the Famke Janssen is in that end scene, so it's like
yeah.
But I think as well, like, I think like the original trilogy, in a way, like whatever you think of Last Stand, it still follows through on what the first two did. Like, that is a cohesive trilogy.
Yeah.
I think with these set of three films, it's not as cohesive. I think that you can still watch them as a trilogy, but you can easily watch them as like standalone X-Men films and enjoy them for what they are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's where, like you, Jake, is that I give this film a big pass, because I think a lot of people are too harsh on it, because I think that Oscar Isaac did do a good job. I think it's just that they let him down in maybe just not giving him a big enough suit to make him like a big enough guy, and maybe more of the stuff you saw when he was in Charles's head and he literally turns giant, etc. But just the action scenes are just so cool and fun at times. The fact that you've got Psylocke there, who we've never seen, so she's bringing in the purple cool X-Men energy again, so she looks great. You got
Storm with the mohawk. gold, absolute gold. That as soon as I saw the trailer and saw she had the mohawk, screamed with joy. I was like, yes, because that is my Storm, one with the mohawk.
Yeah, and I don't know why. It's something about that moment in which, when they all team up to defeat Apocalypse again. So they bring in the idea of the X-Men using their powers together. I think she uses her lightning, and you get Cyclops' laser vision. I'm like, oh yeah, this is really cool. But when he tries to teleport away and he has that portal, and you just see her like with the glowing eyes and like the hands, and she's bringing down like the lightning, and it stops it. I don't know, something about that. I was just like, yeah, that looks so cool. I just really like it. And I think as the music and the soundtrack gets really like high at that moment.
Like, in that end sequence, like, I wasn't huge on Sophie Turner's Jean Grey and Ty Sheridan as Psycho. I think they play the parts okay, but I wasn't completely sold on them.
No.
But when we get to that final act and, Jean Grey's coming out, she's walking on thin air, the big phoenix comes out, the music's swelling up, I thought that was fantastic. And it sort of, upon rewatch, I was like, wow, this is actually hitting me more than I thought it did. And I thought that was a really good moment. And then, yeah, when, we're inside Charles's head and he's like, I'm not alone. And then she comes out of there. I thought that was awesome. Absolutely awesome.
Still sticks with the weird elements of the Phoenix storyline, though, that they're like, it's within her the whole time. It's like, that's not what the comic book storyline is. So we already had the writing on the wall there that they were messing with that storyline again of it not being this cosmic entity. But yeah.
Especially considering it then gets contradicted in the next film. It's like, it's inside her all along until she goes into space and encounters more of it, apparently.
Let's not talk about Dark Phoenix.
No.
I will say, my biggest criticism of this film, unfortunately, is Jennifer Lawrence. I don't know what happened. Like, I heard there was a lot of behind-the-scenes drama with Jennifer Lawrence not wanting to be in the makeup of Mystique as much. So they sort of had to work a story where she's not needed in the Mystique as much. And then you had this whole thing of like, oh, I don't want to be blue anymore. I was like, well, how that makes no sense from what we just saw in Days of Future Past. But this is the problem with the 10-year gap. That's why I sort of mentioned. But yeah, and I also found that Jennifer Lawrence's performance was just incredibly dull. Like, it really seemed like she phoned it in, she didn't want to be there, and she was just reading the lines off the script. I really did not like her in this film at all. And I also thought, what purpose is she really playing in this film, apart from a tool to bring in Nightcrawler, which, by the way, is an absolute delight in this film. I found him really charming.
Yeah, well, similar with like Angel, like he doesn't get a great amount of screen time or like story, but at least like he has those cool moments where he has the metal wings and you see them like flying like daggers towards them. But unfortunately dies. But
yeah, I also like the reference when we meet Angel. Well, not when we meet him, but when Apocalypse meets Angel, that you've got Metallica, the Four Horsemen playing in the background while he's being transformed. So I got to give props to that.
I will say that Mystique did introduce me to probably who now might be my favourite mutant, not because of skills or anything like that, but just in terms of personality, which is Caliban. Just anyone who just conducts themselves in that really shady environment but still refers to themselves with the third person. I'm just like, you are my guy.
I agree with Jake, though, that I think that Jennifer Lawrence does sort of stick out a bit. And I don't know, I get that they were like, oh, she's the star of the Hunger Games and everything, we got to keep her in this franchise, because there was, of course, that famous poster which dodgily showed Apocalypse like strangling her. But, I think the idea there was that they were like, oh, look, Jennifer Lawrence in this X-Men film, come see it, is she going to die? All this kind of stuff. But it just felt to me like Days of Future Past would have been a nice place to leave her off. She could have gone. And I like the idea of Mystique being this kind of unknown savior, that they could have been that situation didn't have to be the eyes of the world watching and everyone saw what she did. I think because of the chaos and everything, they could have easily understood that the mutants won the day, but you didn't have to know that it was Mystique. And it would make sense to Mystique as a character to not take credit for that and to not be, kind of being like, oh, nobody knows the truth, but I actually saved it. So I think that would have made sense to her continuing to be a villain and this kind of middle-ish character. So again, I think that was a mistake, is that, again, I'm not big on the fact at the end of this, she's like the mentor and she's like teaching them how to be X-Men, because I'm like, you've barely been an X-Man yourself. So it doesn't really make sense that you're sort of introducing them in this way. But, I think all the school stuff is fun. Like Craig said, I think the Quicksilver scene is not as good. It's more of a CGI fest, but they definitely try to level it up. And also, you get the weird sidetrack with the Wolverine stuff, which is a bit of a random inclusion.
Unnecessary.
But, yeah.
And having Stryker played by an actor from American Pie is always fun.
Who definitely doesn't look like the actor who played... they have that weird morph in Days of Future Past, doesn't he, where he tries to look like the actor who plays him in X2, and it's just like he's definitely shorter and got a completely different body type than that man, but whatever.
You know what this film also is severely lacking compared to the first two is scenes between Charles and Eric. They are too far and few between. There's just not many engagements between them. You have that one where he's in the head, when Apocalypse is making the suit for him, and then you have the other one pretty much at the end, when they're about to start destroying the world. But that's pretty much it. And I felt that was what was really missing in this film, is that thematic element between Charles and Xavier, between Charles and Eric, the constant relationship and chemistry between them. We didn't really get any of that in this film, and I felt that was a big hindrance towards it.
But they did at least continue the theme of the loss and everything that Magneto experiences.
Yeah,
so again, bringing from First Class, they still have that tragedy element and him losing control and all of that. I think that works quite well. So they always do Magneto pretty well, do Xavier pretty well as well.
Like I said, I think they just needed to establish for me why he was willing to basically start a relationship with a human. That's still the only element of that sort of story that bothers me.
One last thing, I really liked the tie-in at the end after Mystique gives her all your X-Men sort of speech, when Eric says, "What will you do, Charles, when someone comes knocking at your door?" He's like, "Well, I will feel a great swell of pity for whoever comes here looking for trouble." And I just love how they tied that to the end of the first X-Men film when they're playing chess, and then you get the epic closing of the doors on Charles, and it's just epic. I really like how they ended the film there.
Yeah, that was great. Also funny that it happens after the house has literally been obliterated. So he's like, "I feel sorry for anybody who comes here looking for trouble again, because this place is blown up once and I'm not letting it blow up again."
Well,
you didn't do a very good job of protecting them last time, did you, John?
Well, they make a joke about that in Deadpool. What, the house that gets blown up every couple of years?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the fact that the first time the house is destroyed is they destroyed it themselves accidentally. Must have just been the beacon for everyone else to be like, "Oh, the house can be destroyed. Come on, lads."
Yeah, so I think that this film, it showed promise to potentially go forward into, new and interesting ways, which we know it didn't, but, we within the confines of this film itself, it still gives us a lot of promise, a lot of cool costumes, great music again, fantastic visuals and great performances, but there are lost story and script elements which just don't quite work. So I think
a good villain, damn it, good villain.
It's understandable that this is the weakest of the three, but I still don't think it deserves where people say, "Oh, it's one of the worst comic book movies," etc. It's not that bad, but I digress. So we've talked all about the trilogy, and this week we're not going to be talking about the movie Vault just yet, because we want to get some more expertise on that first, which we'll find out in today's Endgame.
We're in the Endgame now.
It's so annoying!
Endgame time. Jake.
Hello.
I have to confess, I don't think David's a match for you this week.
Okay.
So instead, what we've decided to do is we found you a worthy opponent for this endgame. May I present to you self-proclaimed comic guru, someone you yourself have mentioned on this podcast as having more information about aspects of the X-Men universe than yourselves, a co-host of Capes, Cowls and Masks.
The anticipation is killing.
May I introduce Tom Gapper!
Hello!
You have your music, Tom.
Love it. Appreciate it.
Somehow I knew he was going to make an appearance today.
And I've brought all of the X-Men with me, as you can see.
The question is, will that help in this endgame? I'm gonna guess not, because the actual endgame is not about X-Men. Sorry to tell you. So, Tom, welcome. Good to have you.
Good to be here. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. It'll be
No problem.
be fun to spank Jake's ass.
Very sneaky. Very, very sneaky, I will say.
So this is part of a new project we're trying, which is basically the Challenger series. So from time to time, we may experiment with having a guest on purely for endgame purposes, just to see how a fresh mind coming into this can perform against someone who has just been talking so much throughout the episode already. So, how do you fancy your chances, Jake?
Not good, probably. But we'll see. We'll see what the end game is. If you're saying it's not about the X-Men, then we'll see.
Right. Okay, so end game time. So this is a game I've lovingly called the Generation Game. Oh wait, crap. That's trademarked. Okay, no, right. That's not what the end game is called, right? The end game is not called the Generation Game, but it's basically like that. Whatever. Anyway. What this endgame is that obviously one of the pivotal things that the new X-Men trilogy was able to do was basically the successful recasting of younger versions of characters that we've already known. However, this is not a new phenomenon that the X-Men started, nor is it something that they hold exclusively. There are many situations where people have been recast as older or younger versions of characters. I want to see how well you can remember who plays those characters. So what will happen is I'm going to give you the name of an actor, and I want you to try and guess, or give me the name of the actor who plays either the younger or the older version of the same character, whether that be in the same film or a different film. So we'll do a quick experiment. If I were to give you the name Alec McGuinness, you would say to me
Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Ewan McGregor.
No, that's the character. Ewan McGregor. Yeah. So. I don't need the character that they play. I just need the other actor who plays their aged counterpart. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, that makes sense now. Okay, cool.
The way this is going to work is we're going to use my favorite buzzer site. So,
let's do this.
So a reminder: I don't want the character. I don't want the film. I just want the other actor. So, if I were to say to you, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Ooh, they've fallen at the first hurdle. Jake.
Bruce Willis.
Correct.
Clever.
Yeah, so Bruce Willis, because they both play the same character, Joe, in the film Looper. A film where people are sent back in time to be assassinated.
I think I can be forgiven for forgetting that film.
It's a great film, so you can't be forgiven.
Okay, number 2. Tommy Lee Jones. David, do you know this?
I think so.
I know the film now. I just don't know the actor's name.
I can't even think of the film.
Would it help if I said it's a trilogy?
No, I know who it is. I'm just trying to remember the actor's name.
He's inevitable.
Jake.
Josh Brolin, Men in Black 3.
I was like, what's a vague clue I could give?
They both play Agent K at different points in time, but yeah, it is indeed Josh Brolin. Now we go for Robert De Niro. It's not as quick fire as I was imagining. That one
I'm trying to. He's got so many movies, so that's why it's a bit hard.
This is possibly like the most famous example of this.
I don't know if I've got this one.
No, I'm really drawing a blank completely. I can't even place the film.
I bet it's going to be completely obvious once you say it.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
Okay, that's gone. I was looking for Marlon Brando. The Godfather series.
Yeah.
Okay, number 4. I think this is probably going to be slightly more up your guys' street. Alden Ehrenreich. That is Jake.
Harrison Ford.
Correct. They are both the actors who play Han Solo from Star Wars.
I'm not going to lie, I barely understood the name you said.
I feel bad now, because this next one is one of the ones I considered hard. And I will say that this is a child actress. Right?
Okay.
Lily Aspel.
Yeah, this is a hard one.
If this is what I think it is, then the person who would be, I'm like, how would you know that?
Hence why it's one of the harder ones. But also, this is comic book, so I would have thought there's more of a chance.
Oh, okay. That's not what I was thinking then.
Okay, cool.
Okay, I think I might know.
It's that I know the actress's name, but I just can't place where. I can't even imagine what she looks like.
I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this person
in my head.
talking about these films.
I'm just gonna guess Zoe Saldana.
It is not Zoe Saldana.
Damn it.
So Jake, you have a chance.
You said it's from a comic book film, yeah?
Yep. Jake?
Is it Jennifer Lawrence?
It's not Jennifer Lawrence.
I was thinking the younger Mystique in First Class.
Not a bad guess. I was looking for Gal Gadot because they're both Diana in the Wonder Woman films.
Fair enough.
Okay, number 6. If I say to you, Chris Pine.
Steve Trevor.
No, there are few rounds on where you got that wrong. 1, you didn't buzz. 2, that was the character.
I want to answer.
Jake?
William Shatner.
It is William Shatner.
Yeah, I was like, surely you
Trek.
wouldn't go with the child actor from Star Trek. That would just be cruel.
Number 6. Sorry, number 7 even. Mila Kunis.
I've only seen her in like 2 things.
2 very bad things. I don't really know Mila Kunis' filmography, to be honest.
I will say up front, I don't think this is an obvious one.
That makes me feel a little better. I'm just resolving to try and think who she looks like a younger version of.
That's also not a bad shout. You can't just randomly shout actors and actresses' names and hope there's a connection.
God damn it, who looks like Mila Kunis?
Okay, that's time on that one. I was looking for Angelina Jolie. Because they both play a character in the film Gia.
Ah.
Never seen the film, so...
But I can kind of see... Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Okay, the next one we go for... I'm looking for... who plays the younger version of Gloria Stewart? Think Oscars.
It would help if I knew who Gloria Stewart was.
It'd be so much easier if I wasn't colorblind.
Think 84 years. Tom.
Kate Winslet.
It is Kate Winslet.
Yes! I got there.
They are both the people who played Rose Dawson in Titanic.
I am nailing this.
Well, it's nice to see Tom on the board at this point. Okay, we're at question number 9. Jake has 4, Tom has 1.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 9, this is the only animated film on the list.
Ooh.
So I'm going to give you that one for free. The child that I'm giving you is Jonathan Taylor Thomas.
I think
I was going to take a wild guess because I
Tom?
do not know that name. Matthew Broderick.
It is Matthew Broderick.
Holy shit!
From what?
The Lion King.
Oh, Lion King.
I took a gamble on the fact that Craig would throw a Lion King question in there. And it worked
Again,
out.
not bad logic.
Matthew Broderick has come out like twice, I think, for Tom.
I know!
In the Endgame session.
Clearly there's some link between me and Matthew Broderick that I'll have to explore in my own time.
I think we call it the Nathan Lane. Anyway. Okay, we're on to number 10. Good luck.
Oh, great.
Vanessa Redgrave.
I don't know who this actress is.
We're looking for the younger, but probably more well-known actress.
Younger and more well-known.
Yep, who plays the same character in this literary adaptation.
Oh, it's definitely not up my street, that sort of stuff.
Like I said, I wanted to make this quiz mixed.
Yes, understandable.
The X-Men aren't helping me on this one.
I'm just gonna take a guess.
Go for
and
it.
think the only like a big popular actress I can think of now, Margot Robbie.
It is not Margot Robbie.
Emma
Tom?
Stone? God.
It is not Emma Stone. So, David, do you have any idea? I'll give you a hint.
Yeah,
It's an
no.
Irish name that I struggle to pronounce.
Ah, now I know who it is.
Saoirse Ronan.
Saoirse Ronan, yeah.
Yeah.
They both play the same character in Atonement.
Oh.
So, David, you have seen that film with me. We've both laughed about the typewriter scene.
Mhm.
Okay. This one's a bit nicer, but still on the realms of literary.
Okay.
I'm going to give you Ian Holm. Jake?
Martin Freeman.
It is Martin Freeman. And they are
If one of you didn't get that one, I would be like, guys.
they are both Bilbo Baggins. Okay, next up we have Zachary Quinto.
Leonard
Tom?
Nimoy.
It is indeed Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah.
Star Trek again.
Boom.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you a heads up about this one.
Okay.
These are two both well-known actors. I'm genuinely surprised that they're linked in this way. So it'll be interesting to see if you know who. I don't expect you to know the film. The film's a bit random, but you might know that the actors are connected this way. I'm gonna give you Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf plays the younger version of this well-liked Marvel actor.
I can see the film in my head, but I just can't.
I'm just gonna. Is it RDJ?
It is RDJ. They play the same character in A Guide to Recognizing Saints.
That was a complete guess, but I'll take it.
Oh.
I would have gone with somebody blonde, I would have thought.
Well, out of everyone in the MCU, I was like, who looks like Shia LaBeouf the most? I was like, well, probably RDJ.
Nah, see, that's why I would have gone like Chris Pratt or someone.
Why?
Yeah.
Explain yourself.
He looks nothing
Explain
like
yourself,
Shia
Dave.
They just, I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking too much of Even Stevens days or something.
Okay, next up we have... I pray I've got this right. David, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Michael Gambon.
Oh. Jude Law.
It is indeed Jude Law.
Ah, shit, yeah.
They both play...
Dumbledore.
Dumbledore
Yeah.
in the Harry Potter universe. So, Fantastic Beasts and The Crimes of Grindelwald.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yep,
And now there's a new one with Mads Mikkelsen replacing Johnny Depp.
Yep.
So that should be something.
Okay, and now on to the final question. And the final one I'm giving you is Matthew Perry.
Ah, shit. Ah!
Tom?
Zac Efron.
It's Zac Efron.
Yeah.
In the film 17 again.
Yeah.
So,
course.
we come to the end of the end game. And with a respectable 4 points to 7, Jake is the winner.
Hooray.
Congratulations, Jake. And I'm going to greet you with the Song of the People of Victory, which is me filibustering until I can...
Well, that was a well-deserved victory, Jake, but I feel like I made you work for it in the end, but just a little too late. Like Icarus, I flew too close to the sun.
Tom was just saved by those teenage heartthrobs of Martin Broderick and Zac Efron.
Apparently I have a type. Who knew? Someone tell my fiance.
So yeah, well done, Jake. And we brought Tom in, and Tom, we have specifically delayed the movie vault because we thought we wanted to get your opinion as well today, because we're talking about the X-Men Beginnings Trilogy, as to what should go into our movie vault, if at all any films, when we're talking about X-Men First Class, Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse. Should any of these films go in the movie vault? I think previously, was it just X-Men and X2, I think we put in from the original trilogy?
It may have only been X2.
Yeah, I put in X2 when I was last on, so... Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just X2 is the film within the movie vault. So whether any other X-Men films deserve to go in there.
I feel like Days of Future Past deserves to go in there. I think it was a stellar film, bringing together two generations of X-Men. And it was, I had my doubts about it initially, but watching it, I was completely blown away. And it was like, I'd say it's almost as good as X2 in some ways. The other two films, I have too many problems with to send them to the vault.
Yeah, I concur with Tom. I think Days of Future Past should be the one that goes in.
Days of Future Past.
Yeah, I agree.
My God.
I think I think out of the newest ones, it is the most successful.
I mean, I would heavily argue that I think, given all of the circumstances it was under, First Class also deserves to go in.
I would want to agree with you if they hadn't killed off Darwin. To me, that is unforgivable on so many levels. Not least of all, he was like the only black guy in the film.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, that's not great. And like, obviously I understand why it should have been impossible for Darwin to die in that way. If he's meant to adapt to any situation, why could he have not just converted himself into pure energy to also just be energy and therefore not be blown up? But I don't know. I think that given it had the task of introducing us to a brand new Professor S, a brand new Magneto, and just this entire concept within like the Cuban Missile Crisis and just the 60s vibe, being able to like marry all of those elements together while also having to have done it within the most arduous of production issues. I think that it represents so much of what we would be looking for films to sort of achieve, whilst also in like unideal situations. That I think it's quite commendable for that. So that's my argument for why I think it should. I'm not saying Days of Future Past shouldn't go in. That obviously should. I'm saying it should go in as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who do mention it a lot as one of the underrated comic book movies. Also, I think from what Craig said, it reminded me of the point I was saying about how Days of Future Past succeeds thanks to a lot of the things that they build up within First Class. So that I don't think that the Magneto and Charles relationship would be half as strong. Whereas I think something like X2, if you were to talk about X-Men films, I think that can stand alone. You don't have to have really seen the first film. Whereas I think the Days of Future Past does benefit a lot from First Class as well, in terms of building up Mystique, Charles, and Eric. So, I don't
know. I'll say that just based on how they handled Magneto and Professor X in First Class, especially with the culmination of it, and in light of Craig's argument, I will happily allow it into the vault alongside Days of Futures Past. Although it should be with an asterisk next to it. The Darwin shouldn't have died.
Well, there's a lot of problems within it as well, like you said, in terms of performances and how many mutants we got and things like with the timeline. But I think as we said, just as a film, it's enjoyable. It gets the tone right. Craig said as well that they went through a lot of production problems and came out of it actually quite well. And yeah, I think that they handle quite a lot of stuff really well. And it also gets you used to the kind of decades aspect that they go with from there onwards. So yeah, I'm willing to say that, if we're talking about X-Men films as a whole, out of the 6, then to say that X2, First Class, and Days of the Future Past are the top 3, I think is like a pretty fair summary. So yeah, I would say into the vault goes X-Men First Class and Days of Future Past, I would say.
Sorry, Jake, you're outvoted. You just don't get it, man. He doesn't get it, Dave.
Yeah, let's move on to where the people can find us. So, thank you guys for joining us, especially Tom in his surprise appearance there at the end, doing the whole end cameo as you do with comic book movies. So, Jake, where can we find yourself and Capes, Cowls, and Masks?
You can find me on Twitter at SweatyJake, and you can also find me on Letterboxd at Jake Hart, that's HRT. And as for the podcast I do, Capes, Cowls, and Masks, we're on wherever you get podcasts from, so Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever. Every week we're chatting about news, discussions about superheroes, and I'm on there with Tom every week, and occasionally Dave pops his head in when he can. And we'll also be very soon doing our Loki reviews, so watch out for that, because that's going to be starting very soon.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Gapperboy, so that's GAPPERBOI, where I've started in earnest my campaign to get The Question a series, because DC needs to cool it with the Batman. And yeah, as Dave said, you can find me on Capes, Cowls and Masks alongside Jake every week. And I'll also be doing some Loki-related stuff on the podcast in the coming days or weeks, but I won't talk about that quite yet. Wait till that drops.
So yeah, thank you guys for joining us once again. You can catch yourselves at Well Good Movies on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Much like Capes, Cowls and Masks, you can catch us wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can catch us on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, all your favorite podcast outlets. And yeah, please do give us a like, a share, a review. It does help us out massively. So Craig, anything lastly from yourself?
Some words of wisdom I think everyone needs to live their life by. At some point in your life, you're going to be replaced by a younger actor who's basically going to continue the part that you yourself are playing in life. Just accept it, embrace it, and think about how much hotter they could be than you, and just how much they can bring to your own personal self-esteem. Enjoy it.
Well, yeah, thanks guys. We'll catch you in the next one. And just remember, you can fire your arrows from the Tower of Babel, but you can never strike God. Catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Charles!
Bye.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Advance.